The flickering flame of a kerosene lamp casts dancing shadows across the mud walls of a single room where 9-year-old Amina sits hunched over her school notebook. Her mother moves quietly in the dim light, stirring a pot of rice over a wood fire that fills the small space with smoke. Outside, the African night has swallowed their village whole, leaving only the distant sounds of crickets and the occasional bleating of goats. This is Kwara State, Nigeria, in the early 1990s, where electricity remains as distant a dream as the moon itself. Amina's younger brothers crowd around the small table, squinting at their homework in the amber glow. The lamp's wick needs constant adjustment, and fuel is precious. When the kerosene runs low, which happens more often than anyone cares to admit, the family retreats into complete darkness, their day ending with the sun regardless of unfinished tasks or unfulfilled needs. Her mother often jokes that they live by God's time, not man's schedule, but Amina senses the exhaustion behind the humour, sees how her mother's shoulders sag when she thinks no one is watching. The village clinic, a modest concrete building 3 kilometres away, closes at sunset because there is no power to run its equipment after dark. Babies are born by lamplight when they choose nighttime for their arrival. The teacher at the primary school, Mr. Adebayo, often tells stories about Lagos, where he studied, describing a city that never sleeps, where lights burn bright enough to turn night into day. To Amina, these stories sound like fairy tales, too fantastical to be real. Yet something stirs within her as she listens to these accounts of electric light, of machines that work at the flip of a switch, of refrigerators that keep medicine cold, and fans that move air on sweltering nights. While her classmates giggle and dismiss Mr. Adebayo's tales as exaggerations, Amina finds herself dreaming of harnessing that mysterious force called electricity. She doesn't yet know what it means to be an engineer, doesn't understand the physics of current and voltage, but she knows with startling clarity that she wants to be the one who brings light to places like her village. Her father, a subsistence farmer who grows yams and cassava on a small plot inherited from his father, listens patiently when Amina shares these dreams during their evening meals. He's a gentle man with calloused hands and tired eyes, someone who has never travelled beyond the neighbouring towns, but possesses the wisdom to recognise something special in his daughter's curiosity. When she asks why their village has no electricity, while the government offices in the distant state capital do, he doesn't dismiss her questions or tell her to focus on more practical matters like learning to cook or weave. Instead, he explains what he knows about power lines and substations, about how electricity travels from big plants in the cities through cables strung on tall poles, about how expensive it is to bring those cables to small villages where people cannot afford to pay large monthly bills. His explanations are simple but honest, and they plant seeds in Amina's mind about problems that might someday have solutions. She begins to understand that electricity isn't magic, but technology, something created by humans and therefore something that can be improved, made cheaper, brought to forgotten places. The constraints of village life become more apparent as Amina grows older. She watches her mother spend hours each week walking to distant markets because they cannot refrigerate perishable goods. She sees how the local blacksmith must work only during daylight hours, limiting his productivity and income. The water pump that serves their section of the village operates on a diesel generator that breaks down frequently, leaving families to carry water from a distant well during repairs. These inconveniences layer upon each other, creating a quality of life that feels perpetually constrained by the absence of reliable power. At night, when homework is finished and the kerosene lamp finally extinguished, Amina lies on her mat, staring up at a ceiling she cannot see, imagining a different version of her world. She pictures her mother reading by the light of an electric bulb, her father listening to radio news that doesn't fade with weak batteries, her brothers staying awake to study without straining their eyes or depleting precious fuel. These aren't grandiose dreams of wealth or fame, but modest visions of basic dignity, of human potential unshackled from the tyranny of darkness. The girl who falls asleep in that smoky room, surrounded by the quiet breathing of her family, has no way of knowing that her dreams will one day illuminate thousands of villages across Africa, or that the very frustrations keeping her awake will become the driving force behind innovations that transform entire communities. She knows only that somewhere beyond her village's borders, people flip switches and light floods their world, and she wants to understand how to make that magic available to everyone. In her young mind, the solution feels both impossibly complex and surprisingly simple. Someone just needs to figure out how to bring the light home. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she walked through the university corridors for the first time, each bulb casting shadows that danced across polished floors. For someone who had spent 18 years lighting her way with kerosene lamps and candles, the simple act of flipping a switch felt like commanding magic itself. The scholarship letter in her backpack had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had worn soft, but the words remained as crisp as the day they arrived in her village. Full tuition, room and board. 4 years to study electrical engineering at one of Nigeria's premier institutions. Her mother had wept when the letter came. Not from sadness, but from a joy so profound, it seemed to shake the very foundations of their small mud brick home. The village elders gathered that evening, passing the letter from hand to hand as if it were a sacred text, their weathered fingers tracing words that promised possibilities none of them had dared to dream. Here was a girl who had studied by the light of dying embers, who had walked miles to reach the nearest school, who had solved mathematics problems scratched into the dirt with a stick. Now she would learn to harness the very force that had remained beyond their reach for generations. The journey to the university took her further from home than she had ever travelled. As the bus pulled away from familiar red earth roads and into highways lined with concrete and steel, she watched through the window as the landscape transformed. Villages gave way to towns, towns to cities, and with each mile the night grew brighter. Streetlights stood like sentinels along the roads, their steady glow pushing back the darkness that had defined every evening of her childhood. In the distance, office buildings rose like illuminated monuments, their windows glowing with the warm light of electricity that flowed as easily as water from a tap. Her dormitory room seemed impossibly luxurious with its overhead light, reading lamp and electrical outlets that promised connection to a world beyond anything she had known. Her roommate, a girl from Lagos whose father worked in the oil industry, casually plugged in a small refrigerator, a radio, and a desk fan without a second thought. To her, these were basic necessities. But for someone who had grown up rationing battery power for a single transistor radio, watching her roommate's casual relationship with electricity felt like witnessing abundance beyond measure. The engineering laboratories opened her eyes to possibilities she had never imagined. Rows of computers hummed quietly, their screens glowing with diagrams and calculations that could model entire electrical systems. Oscilloscopes traced the invisible dance of electrons across their green screens, making the intangible suddenly visible. In the power systems lab, massive generators stood ready to demonstrate the principles that could light entire cities, while delicate meters measured currents that flowed with mathematical precision through carefully designed circuits. Her professors spoke of power grids that spanned continents, of turbines that converted wind and water into the electrical current that powered modern life. They discussed transmission lines that carried energy across hundreds of miles with minimal loss, and distribution networks that could deliver power to millions of homes with the reliability of clockwork. Every lesson revealed new layers of complexity in what most people simply took for granted when they flipped a switch. But it was during her first semester break, when she returned to her village, that the true weight of her studies became clear. Walking back into her childhood home, she was struck not by its simplicity, but by the profound darkness that still governed the rhythm of life for her family and neighbours. As sunset approached, the familiar ritual began. Kerosene lamps were filled and lit. Candles were positioned strategically around rooms, and all meaningful activity gradually wound down as night claimed the village. She watched her younger siblings struggle to complete their homework by the wavering light of a kerosene flame, their eyes straining against the inadequate illumination that had once been her own reality. The village clinic, where her aunt worked as a nurse, closed its doors each evening not because there were no patients in need, but because performing medical procedures by lamplight was too dangerous to attempt. The small workshop where the village blacksmith repaired tools and farming equipment sat idle after dark. Valuable hours of productivity lost to the absence of reliable light. Sitting in the courtyard of her family home, surrounded by the sounds of a village settling into its nightly quiet, she began to understand that her education was more than personal advancement. Every principle she learned about voltage and current, every equation that described the relationship between power and resistance, every design technique for efficient electrical systems represented a bridge between two worlds. On one side lay the village where she was born, where millions of people across rural Africa continue to live without the basic infrastructure that could transform their possibilities. On the other side stood the gleaming cities with their endless supplies of power, where children studied under bright lights and hospitals operated around the clock. The scholarship had given her more than access to knowledge. It had revealed the vast divide that separated those who had power from those who lived without it. As she prepared to return to university for her second semester, she carried with her a new understanding of her purpose. The equations and circuit diagrams awaiting her in those fluorescent-lit classrooms were not abstract concepts to be memorized and forgotten, but tools that could one day bring light to the darkness she had known, power to the places that had been overlooked, and possibilities to the people who had always been told that certain dreams were beyond their reach. Her journey was no longer just about personal success. It had become about building the bridge between two worlds and learning to carry electricity to the places that needed it most. The job offers came pouring in like rain after a drought. Silicon Valley, London, Dubai. Each envelope carried promises of six-figure salaries, stock options, and corner offices with panoramic views. For most engineering graduates, these would represent the culmination of years of struggle and sacrifice. But as Funmilayo Adebayo sat in her modest apartment in Lagos, surrounded by these golden tickets to prosperity, her mind kept drifting to a different kind of light. She remembered the kerosene lamp that had illuminated her childhood evenings, its flickering flame casting dancing shadows on mud walls as she bent over textbooks borrowed from classmates. She thought of her grandmother's calloused hands, working by candlelight long after sunset, because electricity was a luxury their village had never known. The offers before her represented everything she had been taught to want, but they also represented something else. Walking away from the darkness that still consumed 10,000 villages across Nigeria. The decision that would define her legacy came not in a boardroom or career counseling session. but during a visit home to Ogbomoso. The same dirt roads greeted her, the same absence of street lights, the same children squinting over homework by the glow of phone flashlights. Her engineering degree from the University of Lagos felt simultaneously like armor and burden. She possessed the knowledge to change everything. The question was whether she possessed the courage to try. 3 weeks later, Funmilayo declined every foreign offer and founded Renewable Energy Solutions Africa from a cramped office space above a pharmacy in Ikeja. Her business plan was written on recycled paper. Her startup capital consisted of savings from tutoring sessions and a small loan from her uncle who sold spare parts at Alaba Market. The technology giants of Silicon Valley would have to wait. Africa needed her more. The skeptics emerged immediately, like locusts after the first rain. Former professors questioned her sanity. Family members whispered about wasted potential. Industry veterans dismissed her vision as naive idealism. How could a young woman with no manufacturing experience compete against established solar companies? How could she create technology affordable enough for villages where families survived on less than $2 per day? The questions felt like stones thrown at glass, each one threatening to shatter her resolve. But Funmilayo had learned something crucial during her scholarship years that textbooks never taught. Innovation thrives in constraints. While multinational corporations designed solar panels for middle-class suburbs, she focused on families who counted every naira, while others created systems requiring professional installation. She developed plug-and-play solutions that village mechanics could maintain with basic tools. Her first prototype emerged after 8 months of 18-hour days. The solar panel was smaller than industry standards but produced enough electricity to power LED lights and charge mobile phones. The battery system used locally available components and could be repaired with parts found in any Nigerian electronics market. Most importantly, the entire system cost less than what many families spent on kerosene in 6 months. The breakthrough came through understanding psychology as much as technology. Traditional solar installations required upfront payments that exceeded annual household incomes. Funmilayo pioneered a rent-to-own model where families paid weekly installments smaller than their existing energy expenses. Mobile money platforms handled transactions, eliminating the need for physical collection routes. Within 3 years, customers owned their systems outright, achieving energy independence at a price point previously unimaginable. Her small team of 6 engineers worked from borrowed desks and shared laptops, designing circuits by day and assembling prototypes by night. They tested durability by leaving panels under Lagos traffic for weeks. They refined battery life through trial and error in harmattan dust storms and rainy season floods. Each failure taught lessons that million-dollar laboratories might miss. Rural technology must be virtually indestructible because replacement parts require 3-day journeys. The first village installation happened in Kogi State, a community where the national grid had never reached despite promises spanning 4 decades. Funmilayo arrived with her team and 10 solar systems, expecting curiosity but encountering suspicion. Previous development promises had evaporated like morning mist. Why should this young engineer be different? The village elder's question cut to the heart of everything. If this technology was so revolutionary, why was she here instead of selling it to wealthy people in Abuja? Her answer came not through words, but through demonstration. That first evening, as her solar LED lights illuminated the village primary school, children gathered to read books they had never been able to open after sunset. The local clinic could finally refrigerate vaccines that had been spoiling for years. Small businesses extended operating hours, increasing daily income by margins that seemed miraculous to families accustomed to limitations. Word spread through networks invisible to urban dwellers, but powerful as cellular towers in rural areas. Market women travelling between villages carried stories of electric lights that required no monthly bills. Truck drivers mentioned schools where children studied after dark. Traditional rulers began requesting demonstrations, intrigued by technology that could deliver what politicians had promised but never provided. Within 18 months, Renewable Energy Solutions Africa had installed systems in over 200 villages across 6 states. Each installation refined the business model, improved the technology, and expanded the vision. Funmilayo realized she was not just selling solar panels, but rebuilding the relationship between technology and community, creating pathways to prosperity that bypassed decades of infrastructure neglect. The transformation extended beyond electricity itself. Villages with reliable power attracted small businesses that required refrigeration or electronic equipment. Teachers relocated to communities where evening classes became possible. Healthcare workers could provide services previously impossible without consistent electricity. Children's academic performance improved dramatically when homework became feasible, regardless of sunset timing. But success brought new challenges that business schools never anticipate. Competitors emerged, some offering inferior products at deceptively low prices, others copying her innovations without understanding the social infrastructure that made them work. Government officials demanded licenses, permits, and payments that threatened to strangle the very affordability that made her solutions revolutionary. Funmilayo navigated these obstacles with the same methodical persistence that had carried her from village childhood to engineering degree. She documented everything, built relationships with regulatory officials, and never compromised on quality even when margins grew thin. Most importantly, she trained village technicians who could maintain and repair systems locally, creating employment while ensuring sustainability. The numbers told only part of her story. 10,000 villages, 500,000 families with reliable electricity for the first time in their lives. 3 million children able to study after dark. Thousands of small businesses extending profitable operating hours. But statistics could not capture the grandmother in Ekiti State who watched her granddaughter read bedtime stories by LED light, or the clinic in Borno State where vaccines stayed cold through power outages that once meant death sentences for preventable diseases. As she sits in her expanded headquarters today, Funmilayo Adebayo represents something profound about the relationship between education and purpose. Her engineering knowledge could have earned millions in foreign markets, but her greatest achievement came from rejecting that path. Sometimes the most valuable thing we can do with opportunity is bring it home. Her story illuminates a truth often forgotten in discussions about development and progress. The most sustainable solutions emerge from understanding communities from within, rather than imposing changes from above. Technology becomes transformative not when it impresses experts, but when it serves people who need it most, at prices they can afford, through systems they can maintain. The woman who grew up without electricity now ensures that 10,000 villages will never again depend on kerosene lamps and dying phone batteries. Her legacy burns brighter than any corporate achievement, because it literally lights up, lives, one solar panel at a time. The dust settles as the last solar panel clicks into place on the tin roof of a small clinic in rural Kano State. Below, a nurse flicks a switch for the first time in this building's history. Light floods the examination room. In the corner, a refrigerator hums to life, ready to preserve vaccines that will save children's lives. Standing outside, watching this transformation unfold, is the woman whose childhood was defined by the absence of this very thing she now brings to others. Her name carries weight across 10,000 villages that have felt the touch of her solar revolution. The work begins before dawn. Her team loads trucks with solar panels, batteries, and installation equipment while most of Nigeria still sleeps. Today, like every day for the past 3 years, they will drive hours into the countryside, navigating roads that barely deserve the name, to reach communities that major infrastructure projects have never touched. She learned long ago that you cannot wait for the grid to reach every corner of Africa. You must bring power directly to the people, one village at a time. The first installation changed everything she thought she knew about her mission. It was a small primary school in Kaduna State, where children had been studying by candlelight and kerosene lamps for decades. When her team finished connecting the solar system and the classroom lights switched on in broad daylight, demonstrating their readiness for the evening hours, the children erupted in cheers that could be heard across the entire village. But it was what happened that night that truly revealed the magnitude of what they were accomplishing. She returned after sunset to observe how the community would adapt to their new reality. What she found transformed her understanding of electricity from a technical achievement into a social revolution. In the newly illuminated classroom, she discovered not just the enrolled students hunched over their notebooks, but their older siblings, their parents, even grandparents who had never learned to read, all gathered around makeshift desks, sharing textbooks and copying letters by electric light. Education, she realized, was not bound by age when opportunity finally arrived. Word travels faster than electricity in rural Nigeria. Within weeks of that first installation, delegations from neighboring villages began appearing at her small office in Abuja, asking when she could bring the same transformation to their schools, their clinics, their small businesses that closed at sunset not by choice but by necessity. Her calendar, once marking individual appointments, became a map of hope stretching across states she had never imagined reaching so quickly. The requests revealed needs she had not anticipated. A midwife in Borno State explained how many babies had been born by flashlight and how many complications had gone untreated because procedures requiring steady illumination were impossible after dark. A carpenter in Plateau State described how his productivity had been cut in half because he could only work during daylight hours, limiting his ability to support his growing family. A young girl in Taraba State wrote a letter asking if the solar panels could be installed in time for her secondary school exams, because studying by candlelight was damaging her eyesight. Each story reinforced her conviction that access to electricity was not a luxury, but a fundamental requirement for human dignity and development. She had grown up without power, but she had escaped to the city for education. These communities had no such escape route. If change was going to come to them, it would have to be delivered directly to their doorsteps, one solar panel at a time. Her team expanded from 3 engineers to 15, then 30, then 50. They trained local technicians in each region, understanding that sustainable development required local ownership and expertise. Village leaders learned to troubleshoot common problems, replace simple components, and monitor system performance. What began as charity evolved into partnership, with communities taking responsibility for maintaining and protecting their new electrical infrastructure. The business model emerged organically. Rather than imposing external financing structures, She developed payment plans that respected local economic rhythms. Farmers could pay after harvest seasons. Small business owners contributed monthly amounts that fit their cash flow patterns. Schools and clinics received priority installation with extended payment terms. The goal was never profit maximization, but system sustainability, ensuring that each successful installation could fund the next village's transformation. Technical challenges demanded creative solutions. Standard solar equipment designed for urban installations often failed in rural conditions, where dust storms, extreme temperatures, and occasional flooding tested every component. Her engineering background proved invaluable as she modified battery configurations, developed weather-resistant housing, and created monitoring systems that could function reliably in environments where the nearest repair shop might be hundreds of miles away. The transformation extended beyond illumination. In villages where her team installed solar systems for health clinics, infant mortality rates decreased measurably within the first year. Refrigeration meant vaccines remained viable, medical equipment could be properly sterilized, and emergency procedures could be performed regardless of time of day. In communities where schools received solar installations, enrollment increased as parents recognized that their children could complete homework after contributing to family work during daylight hours. Small businesses experienced the most dramatic changes. Tailors could extend their working hours, dramatically increasing their income. Barbers and hairdressers attracted customers who previously had to travel to larger towns for services. Shop owners kept their stores open later, serving communities where most economic activity had previously ceased at sunset. A blacksmith in Niger State told her that electricity had effectively doubled the number of hours in his day, allowing him to accept more orders and support additional apprentices. The ripple effects surprised even her optimistic projections. Villages with reliable electricity began attracting mobile phone towers, bringing communication infrastructure that connected isolated communities to broader economic networks. Teachers willing to accept postings in rural areas increased when those positions no longer meant living without basic services. Young people who had been planning to migrate to cities began reconsidering their options when their home communities started offering new opportunities. Her solar installations became centers of social change. Evening adult literacy classes flourished under bright LED lights. Community meetings extended past sunset, improving local governance and collective decision-making. Women's groups that had been restricted to daytime activities expanded their programs, increasing female participation in community leadership. Children who had once gone to bed shortly after dark now had time for homework, play, and family conversations that strengthened social bonds. The demand grew exponentially. Regional governments began partnering with her company to integrate solar installations into official rural development programs. International development organizations recognized her model as scalable and replicable across sub-Saharan Africa. Investors who had initially been skeptical about the commercial viability of rural electrification began requesting meetings as her financial returns demonstrated the market potential of serving previously ignored populations. But she never forgot the personal dimension of her mission. Each village installation represented individual dreams finally within reach. The student who could now study for university entrance exams. The nurse who could provide better care to her patients. The entrepreneur who could expand his business beyond daylight constraints. Behind every technical specification and financial projection were human beings whose daily lives had been fundamentally improved by access to clean, reliable electricity. As her company approached the milestone of 10,000 villages served, she reflected on how the work had changed her own understanding of development, technology, and social responsibility. The girl who had once studied by kerosene lamp had become the engineer who ensured other children would never face that limitation. The journey from one village without electricity to 10,000 villages with solar power had taken 7 years, but she was just getting started. 10,000 points of light pierce the darkness across the African continent tonight. In villages where children once strained their eyes by flickering candles, fluorescent bulbs now illuminate homework pages. Where doctors once performed emergency procedures by flashlight, operating rooms hum with the steady power of hope. And in the quiet moments before dawn, when the first switches are flicked on in remote corners of Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and beyond, millions of people begin their days transformed by the vision of one woman who refused to accept that darkness was destiny. Her name is whispered with reverence in boardrooms from Lagos to London, spoken with gratitude in village squares from Kaduna to Kampala. But this is not a story that began in the corridors of power or the halls of universities. This is the story of a girl who grew up in the shadows, who learned to see possibility where others saw only limitation, and who carried the memory of kerosene-stained nights into a future bright enough to illuminate nations. The milestone came on a Tuesday morning in March as rain drummed against the windows of her headquarters in Abuja. Dr. Amara Okonkwo stood before a wall-mounted map of Africa, each pin representing a village that had been connected to her company's solar grid network. Red pins for installations completed in the past month, green for villages where power had been stable for over a year, blue for the newest additions to their expanding constellation of light. Her chief operations officer approached with a tablet, his voice barely containing excitement. The numbers had just been verified by their field teams across 12 countries, 10,037 villages, over 4 million people, lives changed by circuits and cells, by innovation born from necessity, by the relentless pursuit of a dream that had flickered to life in a one-room house without electricity decades before. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering the weight of textbooks carried by moonlight, the acrid smell of kerosene lamps that left everything tinged with smoke, the way her mother would ration lamp oil like it was liquid gold. The girl who had once pressed her face against the windows of the city, marveling at the electric glow that seemed to belong to another world, now stood at the center of a revolution that was rewriting the rules of energy access across the continent she loved. The journey to this moment had been anything but linear. Born in a farming village in Anambra State, southeastern Nigeria, Amara's earliest memories were painted in the amber hues of kerosene light. Her father tended a small plot of yam and cassava, while her mother sold palm oil at the local market twice a week. Their home was a testament to resourcefulness. Walls built from sun-dried bricks, roof patched and repatched with corrugated iron sheets that sang different songs depending on whether the rain was gentle or fierce. Electricity was not absent from their world, it was simply beyond reach. The national grid had lines that ran 20 kilometers away, connecting the state capital and larger towns, but the cost of extending those lines to rural communities like theirs was prohibitive. Generator fuel was expensive and unreliable. Solar panels existed, but the imported systems cost more than her father earned in several years. So they lived, like hundreds of millions of others across Africa, in the spaces between progress and possibility. School was a daily negotiation with darkness. Classes ended at 4 in the afternoon to make use of natural light, but homework extended long into the evening. Amara would position herself beside the single kerosene lamp in their main room, sharing the circle of light with her 2 younger brothers. Mathematics problems solved by flickering flame. English compositions written with one eye on the page and another watching the lamp's fuel level. When the lamp ran low, education stopped. When there was no money for kerosene, learning waited for morning. But even in those constrained circumstances, something extraordinary was taking shape. Amara possessed the kind of curiosity that could not be dimmed by circumstance. While other children played with dolls made from corn husks, she dismantled broken radios to understand how voices could travel through air. When the village's only television set, powered by a car battery, drew crowds to watch the evening news, she was less interested in the programs than in the mechanics of how images appeared on screen. Her father noticed first. He would find her in the small shed behind their house, surrounded by pieces of discarded electronics, a flashlight clenched between her teeth as she examined circuit boards with the intensity of a surgeon. Old mobile phone chargers, radio components, bits of wire and plastic that neighbours had thrown away, all reassembled into configurations that served no practical purpose except to satisfy her need to understand how things worked. The village had a name for children like Amara. They called them the ones who see inside things, and it was meant as both compliment and gentle warning. Intelligence was celebrated, but intelligence that questioned too much, that reached beyond the established patterns of rural life, could lead to disappointment. Dreams had a way of withering when they grew too large for their environment, but Amara's mother, Ngozi, had different ideas about the boundaries of possibility. She had attended secondary school before marriage, unusual for women of her generation, and she had never stopped believing that education was the most valuable inheritance she could give her children. Every kobo saved from market sales, every small sacrifice in household expenses was directed towards school fees and books. When other families questioned the wisdom of investing so heavily in a daughter's education, Ngozi would smile and continue counting coins by lamplight. The first, major turning point came when Amara was 14. A government program designed to identify academically gifted students from rural areas brought standardized testing to their village for the first time. Students from 5 surrounding communities gathered in the local church, the only building large enough to accommodate them all. Amara had never taken a test like this, with questions that seemed designed not just to measure what she knew, but how she thought. Physics problems that asked her to calculate electrical resistance. Mathematics that dealt with exponential growth and logarithmic scales. Reading comprehension passages about renewable energy, technological innovation, and sustainable development. For the first time, she encountered formal language for concepts she had been exploring intuitively in her father's shed. The test lasted 4 hours, and when she handed in her answer sheet, she felt something she had never experienced before. The sense that there might be a world where her curiosity was not an anomaly, but an asset. The results arrived 3 months later, delivered by a young man on a motorcycle who seemed almost as surprised as the family to be making the journey to their remote village. Amara had scored in the top percentile nationally, qualifying for a full scholarship to a federal government college in Abuja. The opportunity included not just tuition, but housing, meals, and textbooks. It was the kind of chance that came once in a generation, if at all. The decision should have been automatic, but rural families understand that decisions are never simple when they involved separating children from their communities. Amara would be 12 hours away by bus, in a city she had never seen, surrounded by students from backgrounds she could hardly imagine. She would return home only during holidays, missing planting seasons, harvest celebrations, and the daily rhythms that had shaped her first 14 years. Her father spent weeks walking the fields at dusk, weighing opportunity against tradition, progress against preservation. Her mother made lists of everything Amara would need, calculating costs they could barely afford, determined that her daughter would not arrive at the capital unprepared, and Amara herself studied the acceptance letter until she could recite it from memory, trying to imagine what it would mean to live in a place where electricity was not a luxury, but a simple fact of daily life. The night before she left for Abuja, the entire village gathered in the church for a send-off ceremony. Neighbours who had watched her grow up offered blessings and advice. The local electrician, who maintained the community's few generators, pulled her aside with a gift, a basic multimeter that had been his first tool decades earlier. The village teacher, who had recognized her potential years before standardized tests arrived to confirm it, pressed a notebook into her hands with a message written on the first page. "Remember us when you change the world," it read. The bus journey to Abuja was Amara's first time leaving her home state, as the landscape shifted from rural farmland to towns with paved roads, from towns to suburbs with streetlights, from suburbs to the sprawling capital with its towers and traffic. She pressed her face against the window and tried to process the scale of the world that was opening before her. When they crossed into the Federal Capital Territory, and she saw her first solar-powered streetlight, she knew she was looking at her future. Federal Government College Abuja was culture shock, distilled into institutional form. Students arrived from every state in Nigeria, from families wealthy enough to afford backup generators and poor enough to understand the luxury of consistent power. Dormitory rooms had electrical outlets, fluorescent lights, ceiling fans that ran 16 hours a day during the dry season. The library stayed open until 10 at night, illuminated by steady bulbs that made extended study possible for the first time in her life. But abundance brought its own challenges. While her rural background had prepared her for academic rigor, it had not prepared her for the social dynamics of urban privilege. Classmates who complained about power outs,